So in my last video, I took a look at the running backs in my fantasy football rankings. In this one, let's take a look at the wide receivers, who I like, who I don't like, and my general strategy for this position. Before we fully begin, let's go over my general rules for this video in case you missed them in my last one. My rankings are based on a 12-team league. This team features a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, flex, kicker, and a defense. For scoring, this league is based on your half-point PPR league. Past touchdowns are worth 4, and all the other standard rules apply. If your league has different settings than the ones listed on your screen, I also have the following rankings listed on my Patreon. Definitely sign up to get access to all those rankings. If you need a custom sheet, just send me an email with proof that you're a donor, and I'll happily send you an Excel file with your custom settings. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's look at my Tier 1 rankings of the wide receivers. Starting with Michael Thomas, Davante Adams, and Julio Jones, these are your premier receivers at this position in fantasy. They get plenty of volume, and if you're picking in the middle of the first round, I would highly recommend taking one of these guys as they'll consistently put up points. Thomas will continue to lead in targets, but Davante Adams has a decent chance of being the #1 fantasy receiver this season based on the lack of weapons that the Packers have. I expect big things from him this season. Out of this tier, Julio Jones still remains underrated, and I'd happily spend a late first round pick on him for my team. Now, the same with the last video, the columns on your screen are the following. We have the base level information like player, team name, and bye week, but we also have RK, which stands for my ranking of that player. We have ADP, which is their average draft position, and we have diff, which stands for the difference between the ADP and my ranking of that player. We can use this to determine value. The final column is the auction price, which is based on your standard $200 league. If your league has 3 wide receivers instead of the standard 2 plus flex, these numbers will obviously be higher. I have all those adjustments in the link below. Let's move on to Tier 2. In this tier, we have my second round receivers. Honestly, this tier this season isn't my favorite. You just aren't getting a ton of pure value from any of these guys based on where they're being drafted. Even though that is the case, they're all still obviously very talented players. Chris Godwin with Tom Brady seems like a great pick, and Kenny Golladay is still pretty underrated in real life, but he seems to be properly rated from a fantasy perspective. Again, this isn't my favorite tier this season. The next tier though, or Tier 3, is probably my favorite tier of this entire draft. You can get a lot of value in fantasy by taking one of these receivers. Guys like Cooper Kupp, Juju, and Robert Woods are all very good players in this tier who are getting picked lower than I think they should be. With Big Ben returning from injury, I'm probably higher on Juju the most. Before we move on from this tier, unless you take 2 receivers in the first 2 rounds, which is something I don't recommend this season, get your number 2 receiver in round 3 this year. There is too much value to pass on. I highly recommend it, and I'll definitely be doing that in all my drafts. Moving on to Tier 4, you get a lot of consistent wide receiver 2 to upper wide receiver 3 production, but obviously these guys aren't good as your top 3 tiers. Starting with Tyler Lockett, the dude consistently puts up big numbers and always seems to be picked a round later than he should be. He's the #1 receiver in the Seahawks offense. Even with the emergence of DK Metcalf, he's still worth a late 3rd to early 4th round pick. Outside of Lockett, 2 guys that I like in this tier are Terry McLaurin and Michael Gallup. Scary Terry has more upside as he's the #1 receiver on a team with nobody else around him. With Dwayne Haskins improving drastically over his rookie season, Terry's a guy that I think will only keep on getting better. He's going to have a ton of targets this season. I highly recommend him as there's a ton of upside in this offense. Make sure you check out the video I did on him that I broke down at the end of last season. Now, as far as Gallup is concerned, he's the #2 receiver on a team that will likely throw the ball even more on early downs with Mike McCarthy as the head coach. Gallup is extremely talented, and he'll keep being utilized in this offense. Yes, the Cowboys did draft CeeDee Lamb in the first round, but the team also did lose Randall Cobb, who had 83 targets last year. I don't think Lamb will eat into Gallup's production as much as others think he will. Plus, Gallup quietly had over 1,100 yards last season in just 14 games, so imagine if he plays the full season. I also broke him down on this channel, so I strongly recommend that you watch both these videos and you'll see why I think they're both really good players. Moving on to Tier 5, this is a tier where you could score a low-end receiver #2, but at the very least, you should be able to get a really good flex option for your team. I broke down DK Metcalf on this channel just a few weeks ago, so make sure you watch that video when you get a chance. He ran a pretty limited route tree as a rookie, and I see him being only more utilized in this offense in his second season. He's obviously an extremely talented player. While I do like him from a real-life perspective, from a fantasy value point of view, he's currently getting drafted way too high for my liking. I might avoid him unless he falls a full round. The final guy we need to talk about in this tier is Marvin Jones. He's the best value in this tier by far. He's getting picked a full 2 to 3 rounds later than he really should be. As a solid flex option and a wide receiver #2 against a terrible defense, I like him a lot this year. Keep an eye out for him as he should start slipping in your drafts. The last tier we'll break down in this video is tier 6. This is a tier that features a ton of upside, but realistically none of these guys are day one starters for various reasons. Either offensive concerns, injury concerns, or simply their role in their respective teams. This is a tier where I'm only looking for upside. Diontae Johnson might be the best upside guy in this entire list. Another guy that I really like based on his development is Mecole Hardman. He had a very limited role as a rookie, but he has a ton of talent. I'm going to draft him to stash him on my bench for him to emerge later on. I think throughout the season he'll become the Chiefs wide receiver number 3 and also a bona fide flex option hopefully by the time playoffs roll around. He's another guy that I broke down on this channel as well. While we won't break down the rest of the players available, my general strategy for wide receivers is to take one receiver in the first 2 rounds, take a second receiver in round 3 due to all the talent and upside, then look for depth later on. There will be plenty of options to fill out your roster and have really good situational matchups. Track defenses that give up a ton of fantasy points and rotate through your roster in order to give yourself the best chances of winning. As I mentioned earlier, my rankings are available in Excel on my Patreon. Only a $1 a month donation gets you access to all those files. As I said earlier, if you need a custom draft sheet since your league has weird scoring, send me an email with proof that you're a donor and I'll happily create that for you before your upcoming draft. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll be back again with my rankings of tight ends and quarterbacks in my next 2 videos. Take care, and you can follow me on Twitter at Samuel R. Gold.